Awesome. Well, hi everyone. This is Lisa Blaisdell, the founder of the World Health Summit, and I am here with Dr. Thomas. Is it Cohen or Cowen? I want to pronounce it correctly.
Cowen.
Cowen. Awesome. Up in the Bay Area, and I am really just so honored to speak with you and pick your brain about all things health. So, first of all, how did this all start for you? What was the catalyst or the impetus that led you to this health journey and having a career around helping others with their health?
I sort of grew up knowing that I was kind of meant to be a doctor, whatever that means. Although I never liked the idea. I just didn't like what I was seeing as doctors, so I tried to do anything but be a doctor, and I ended up in the Peace Corps. And it was in the Peace Corps when I was in Southern Africa teaching gardening that I learned about the work of Rudolf Steiner and Weston Price, of all places. And that made me realize that the medicine that I had grown up with and knew about wasn't the only kind of medicine. And so that allowed me to sort of reconcile with, well, I guess I can do this. And so then I started really getting into health and food and what's really out there. And so that's been 40 some years.
Wow. Wow. That is amazing. So your practice it encompasses a lot of different things. Tell me a little bit about what your specialty or your primary focus is right now with your patients that you're seeing.
My official title is a general practitioner. So I see people of all ages. But right now, because I wrote a book on the heart called Human Heart, Cosmic Heart, I'd say at least a quarter of the people who come to me are looking for a different approach to treating their heart disease. I've also written a lot about autoimmune disease and vaccines and their connection between the two. And I've written about treatments for autoimmune disease, and I have a book coming out very soon about autoimmune disease and vaccines and how to treat them. And so probably another 30 to 40% of the people are for that reason. The other whatever percentage is just anybody with anything.
Right.
It's a different view. I don't do much just sort of standard medicine. In fact, I don't do any really. But I do have families, who come to me. I once a month give somebody penicillin, whether they need it or not is another story. But that's about the extent of it.
So in 47 years, you have seen a lot of change. And
I don't know about 47, about 40 years.
About 40 years. That's a long time. So I think I know the answer to this, but for the sake of the people who will be learning from you, what is your synopsis, or what's your understanding on how we have gotten to this place? I mean, I know that you will say that you see more people with autoimmune, you see more people with heart disease than ever before because these conditions are on the rise. So what is your understanding of how we have gotten to this place as a society where we have these chronic illnesses plaguing so many people?
It's a combination of degradation of the physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and water environment. That plus way too many drugs used by people, and I would probably put vaccines in there as well. But the big picture is we're sort of in a degrading phase of, well, there's a lot of coexistent phases. There's certainly a phase of increasing human consciousness about things like the environment and water and pesticides and poisons in our environment. And alongside a certain kind of increased consciousness, the reality is the world is getting worse. So people are more aware and thinking about it, and it's not uncommon. But the sort of internal pollution mirroring the external pollution, that's getting worse.
So you're big on the mind-body connection, obviously.
Well, I'm big on it's complicated.
Yeah.
I don't talk much about the mind-body connection because everything is connected, and I don't know why we even want to just put it to mind and body. There's a lot of other factors and other aspects of a human being and the natural world, most of which we're not even aware of.
Right.
So there is a mind-body connection. There's a mind-emotional connection. There's a mind-toxicology connection. There's a mind-water connection. There's a mind-water or body-water, body toxicology, all those things. And one of the things we tend to do is overly simplify things and say, well, this is cause because we're taught to think in this reductionist linear way. And the cause, it's like that famous Chinese medicine book, The Web That Has No Weaver. We're caught in a web of bad things happening. And so it's not just one, it's not just glyphosate herbicide, it's not just in the vaccines, it's not just statin drugs poisoning people's metabolism, it's not just horrible diets, it's not just not exercise, it's not just EMFs that people have never been exposed to before. It's all
of it.
And we're exposed to a country and a intellectual informational system that most of it's either disingenuous, disinformation, or flat out lies. And so that's the sort of environment we live in, and it's every human being's kind of sacred quest now to see if they can find out something that's true.
Right.
And I think it used to be people lived and they knew what was true, at least to a certain extent. The nature around them was true and reflected a certain consciousness. Now, I think most people have no clue.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. So my background and my specialty is in nutrition and whole food nutrition, and really helping people get on a great path, because that is such a big role. What is your philosophy? Do you have a particular alignment with a particular kind of diet, or where do you approach helping your patients in this area?
So, I'm one of the founding board members of the Weston Price Foundation, and I've written a couple books with Sally Fallon. And I often tell people that number one question to ask about food is this the best that people have done? You see, when I look at the situation and I look at very well documented evidence that the traditional people, not all of them, but the ones that Weston Price, for instance, studied, or some of the Native Americans who were well studied by Price and others, is that the normal human situation is to basically live healthy, disease-free lives.
Right.
Sort of like, animals in their natural environment.
Right.
A little more complicated than that, but that's how people lived. And they did that eating a variety of diets, but with always had a certain number of principles. Like they always ate animal foods. They always ate animal fats. They always ate some sort of seed or nut or grain food, and they soaked it and fermented it and sprouted it. And they always ate lots of different plant foods, even 100 a year or 20 a day. I wrote a little book about this called How and Why to Eat More Vegetables. And so there was a huge diversity in the diet, always fat, and the fat was from animals. And it was a very clean diet that basically helped these people live mostly disease-free lives. And now there's nobody who lives a disease-free life, especially if you count dental disease because everybody has dental caries. And so the people who say, well, we should eat like raw food vegans, I usually say, can you name a group of humans who ate like that and were successful for 500 years? The fact of the matter is nobody did. Nobody was kind of dumb enough to do that. Their fertility went down, and so they couldn't reproduce. So we have a blueprint for what a healthy diet and healthy strategy looks like. There's, of course, hundreds of different variations of, it could be wild fish or buffalo or pastured eggs or insects or witchetty grubs or whatever, but there's a category of food that was always included in these diets. Same with the category of, leaves and roots and stems. There was always that in people's diet. So it's very clear that's the sort of nourishing traditions, Weston Price approach. And more or less, that's what I've been advocating for 30 years. There are some people who need some restrictions, like no grains for a while or something, but it's a sort of technical matter.
Right, right. So you don't have a hard and fast rule then. You're just about, the foundation, and then if people have a specific condition, you address it. So it sounds like you're okay with some animal protein, the fat, considering that you just wrote a book on heart health. I mean, we've been so conditioned that, saturated fats and all these different fats are bad for us. But then now there's new research showing that, certain fats are good for us, which leads to so much confusion among, the general population.
Well, I have a bit of a smart alecky streak in me, I must admit. And one of the ways I manifest that is I have a picture of a guy on my phone whose name is Buffalo Bull Back Fat. And it's a famous picture hanging in the Smithsonian. He was about 70 or so at the time of this painting. I can't remember the painter's name. But I can tell you he looks and was in a lot better health than anybody 70 years old now. And I sometimes ask people who say, and there was also very well documentation, no heart disease in their tribe. So here's a tribe of Native Americans living without cancer, without heart disease, without autoimmune disease. So I ask people who say that humans should eat a low-fat diet. I bring up the picture of Buffalo Bull on my phone, and I say, okay, convince him that we should stop eating these damn buffaloes and instead eat broccoli and tofu. And so far, nobody has accepted my challenge because they can't really convince Buffalo Bull back fat. The back fat is, by the way, the most saturated fat of the buffalo. And he was the most revered chief. So apparently he got to eat that more than anybody else.
Oh, that's so funny.
And so I don't think you could convince him that tofu and broccoli sprouts are better. Not that I have anything against broccoli sprouts. I'm not a big fan of tofu, but that was the human diet. And this business that saturated fat causes heart disease, all you have to do is look at the fact that heart disease was pretty much absent until World War II with the change in the American diet, and the amount of saturated fat went way down since World War II in favor of processed corn oil and soybean oil. And it's what I call my, hey, wait a minute moments. So Americans in particular, but pretty much anybody these days is told, here's what's true. And I could name a million examples of politics, environment, food, nutrition, health. In my bailiwick is health and medicine and food. But if at some point people have to say, hey, wait a minute, these guys didn't do that. They didn't have heart disease. How does it make sense that what you're telling me is correct?
It's true. It's true. Yeah, it's absolutely true. No, I love that. So this is kind of a loaded question, and it's complicated as well. But what do you think the biggest challenge is for educating people. Obviously you have your patients, but really helping to educate society and this country around the whole notion that you can take control of your health. You can do more than what your physician is telling you that you need to do to be well. How do you think we are going to be able to, as health advocates and health educators, really make headway with some of the challenges that we have in our country right now in terms of helping people realize that they can be empowered to live healthier lives?
I mean, one of the things I tell people is it is unfortunately a valuable skill these days to learn how to be a patient. And actually, in the first book I wrote, I put a section on how to be a patient, which I would admit seems like a strange thing to write about. But in order to be an effective patient, which first of all, one doesn't want to be a patient at all.
Right.
Second of all, if you because that's what our whole medical system is based on. Just by the way, I don't know why I thought of this right now, but I don't know if you know this, but the third leading cause of death in the United States are pharmaceutical drugs.
Yeah.
Properly used, which is always ironic for me when I hear politicians saying that one of their platforms is to make pharmaceutical drugs more available to the people. I always feel like raising my hand and saying, is it the goal then to make pharmaceutical drug deaths the number 2 cause of death, or maybe even number 1?
Yeah.
Anyways, the thing is, having been trained as a medical doctor, what I realize is that I'm trained to find pathology. In other words, if somebody has, say, bad bowels, with bloating, cramps, whatever, my job is to do tests, to look in their or send them to somebody to look in their colon, find out if they have a documented disease like ulcerative colitis or colon cancer or a worm or something like that.
Right.
Now, the important point here is I'm looking for pathology, and if I don't find it, essentially, I never heard anything in all my medical training about what's wrong with that person or what to do about it. So if you go in and you have bad bowels and the doctor runs these tests and says, we didn't find anything, at that point, I don't know how else to say this, but he's not interested and has nothing to say to you about what you can do.
Right.
If he does have anything to say, it's just his own whatever he read last week, or maybe for 10 years like me, or 20 or 40, that eating fiber is good or eating fiber is bad, or you should eat a paleo diet. But that's not part of the medical system.
Right.
His job is pathology or get out of my office.
Right.
And that sounds aggressive and maybe crude, but it has a good side too, because the people who have colon cancer have a bad prognosis.
Right.
The people who have just functional bowel disease, they're mostly going to be fine and have crappy bowels for the next 20 years. But at least they'll live for 20 years.
Right.
So essentially what I've studied is what is going on with those people who don't have pathology, and even the connection between poor function and then developing pathology. So I don't know what your question exactly was, but my main advice is to see that if you go to the doctor, you go because you want to know if you have pathology. And if you do, then what they think you should do about it. If you don't have pathology, my best advice is get out of the medical system, because they can't help you. They don't study it. They don't know about it. I had zero training, zero, not even one class in what to do with somebody like that. So there is no, it's not of interest. And so therefore you have to go look around and find out, what does your chiropractor say? What does Aunt Bessie say? What did people do? I mean, I have my ideas on what I think, which not from my medical training, but from 40 years of studying and eating myself. I mean, I've eaten every food and diet on the planet, probably. That's an exaggeration, but it's pretty close. And grow my own food, the whole bit. So,
Yeah.
You got to figure that part out for yourself. And the experts will do you no good. And the sooner, because that's 98% of the people, probably.
Right.
They don't have pathology yet.
Right.
They just don't function well. And let me tell you another little story about the importance of food. I got this from a guy named William Albrecht, who was a physician first, and then he became a soil scientist. And the reason he became a soil scientist is that his job during World War II was examining recruits into the Army. That's the way they did it. And he would say, you're not medically qualified, so you can't join the Army, which nowadays we would think that's good. But
right.
then that was a bad thing, because they wanted to help the cause, so to speak.
Right.
He developed it to the point where he could look at the person's zip code and predict with almost complete certainty the chances of them being rejected. Because at that time, most of the food that people ate, this was in sort of rural Missouri, was either grown by themselves, by their family, or locally. So not like today where people eat from everywhere.
Right.
So their health was reflected in what they ate, which was reflected in the soil.
Yeah.
In other words, as some people have said, you should not so much care about what you eat, but what you eat eats.
Right.
So
right.
the people from the poor soils, because of poor farming practices, et cetera, had up to 60 to 70%, you don't qualify because your teeth are rotten, or you're flat feet, or you're anxious or depressed or asthma or something.
Right.
And from the good counties, from the places where the people cared for their soil, it was less than 5% rejections. And that convinced him that being a doctor is of no use, because it's all about I do better off for the world as a soil scientist, teaching people how to care for their land.
Right.
And that made a huge impression on me, because it's not so clean nowadays, because people don't, they don't eat from San Francisco or whatever.
Right.
But it just goes to show that no matter what your problem is, whether it's flat feet, depressed, anxious, whatever, bad dental health, liver cirrhosis, heart disease, it's the soil.
Yeah.
And it's the environment you live in, including the intellectual, emotional, financial environment. Yeah. I mean, we all live in a horrible financial environment. Just 60% of Americans can't come up with $300 to meet an emergency or something like that. Yeah. I mean, that is a debilitating way to live.
Right.
And so that has to be part of medicine. That's terrible. How can you live like that for years and years? Anyway.
I know. It's a big, big picture. Boy, you are a wealth of knowledge. I'm just fascinated listening to you talk. And I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I do want to help my audience find you and find the resources that you have. So how can people get a hold of your books, get a hold of your information that you have, etc., as we wrap this up today?
So my family started a company to produce unusual and properly grown vegetables and dehydrate them into powders to diversify people's plant consumption. And that website is Dr. Cowen's Garden. That was my children's choice for the name of the company, not mine. But DrCowans garden.com. So that's one. Then I wrote a book on the heart called Human Heart, Cosmic Heart. So there's a website, humanheartcosmicheart.com. and my heart book and articles on the heart and why coronary artery disease is not what we think it is, etc. And then my practice website is fourfoldhealing.com. That's fourfoldhealing.com.
Great. Awesome. I'll have to check out Dr. Cohen's garden, because I'm with a company that has dehydrated fruits and vegetables in a capsule. Yeah.
Yeah, ours are not capsules. Ours
Okay.
are stored in Mirin jars, which are a whole story in themselves.
Okay.
They're meant to. I found it from a restaurant of a chef who basically takes plants, dehydrates them, and uses them as flavoring on food. And
Oh, that's so interesting.
it really does add amazing flavor to the food. If you sprinkle freshly made leek powder on eggs, it's the best thing you ever ate.
Oh, that's so cool.
So that we're doing food products, and it's
Okay.
very interesting.
Oh, that is so great. That is so great. Well, Dr. Cowen, thank you so much for your time today. I know you are really busy, and I'm excited to share this information with my audience. And thank you for all the work that you're doing to help people live healthier lives. That's really what it's all about. So thank you so much again, and have a great rest of your day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.